Right, hello year 11. We're gutted that you lot aren't in. We've been locked down again because we're really enjoying teaching you this year. So it's a real shame because the whole point of RS is you can have discussions with people, and we've kind of lost that, which is a real shame. We also know there's a very high possibility of you still doing your mock exams later in the year, and they will matter hugely towards your final GCSE grades. And so we're going to continue with revision, and this session is going to be about revision of some of the ethical content we haven't revised in class for you. So the first part is me talking through part of your PowerPoint, and then we're going to go on to some practice kind of questions and so on. And so it is, as I was saying, it's a real shame that we haven't got you in. Me and Mrs. James are absolutely gutted about that, as you can probably tell by my voice. Right, I'm going to slip onto my PowerPoint now, and we'll start talking about this one. So you will see on the show my homework resource. I put some a PowerPoint template for you, a sort of mind map template. It's got some keywords and the key concepts we're going to sort of talk about. It's got the whole GCSE kind of on there, and so I recommend either printing it out or having it in front of you as a basis, or a template which you're going to kind of use and annotate to help you with this presentation. So maybe pause this, download it, print it out if you need to. Okay. Right, so we're going to talk about issues of good and evil. I like this module because it's all about crime, punishment, good and evil, and why do people behave in certain ways. So the types of questions you might get are: what is meant by justice, a prison reformer, attitudes towards suffering, death penalty is murder, stuff like that. It's quite tricky. Right. So how do we make decisions? This is what morality is all about. And so if you had a question about morality, you could say, well, how do you know what is right and wrong? You could use your conscience. Many Christians believe you have a conscience which is God-given. You might follow the law, decide what's legal and what's not. You might do what your parents have told you to do, or your parents or your peers or your friends. You might look at sacred texts. You might look at the Quran, the Bible, the examples of Jesus, influential Christians, famous examples, role models, so on. People like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Malala Yousafzai, and so on. There's different types of morality as well you need to know about. Absolute morality is following things to the letter of the law without any flexibility at all. Things like the Ten Commandments: do not murder, do not steal, do not worship idols. They are absolute moralities, they cannot be broken. Right? Relative morality is rules that you might be prepared to adapt. And so if it's keeping the Sabbath holy or not lying, you may decide in certain situations it's okay to do something else, not go to church on a Sunday, or it's okay to lie if you're going to avoid hurting somebody's kind of feelings. And so you will find on that A3 mind map sheet some starting points kind of for you. If you haven't got that, or you're just mind mapping it, maybe pause the video now, and so you've got all of those key ideas down. Right, crime. So what is crime? It's an act which is against the law. How is it different to a sin? And I have seen questions where students have been asked to say what the difference between a sin and a crime is. A sin is something which is not necessarily illegal, but it's something kind of against religion, or makes you less of yourself. If you tell a lie, it's not illegal. You can tell lies. You cannot go to church on a Sunday, but you may be missing out on something, or you may be letting yourself down. So another example could be committing adultery. It's not illegal. You don't go to jail for it, but you might break up your family or make yourself feel bad if you've cheated on your husband or wife. A way of explaining that, you could talk about the 7 deadly sins in Catholicism. They have pride, gluttony, wrath, sloth. These are all different words to describe different sins. Pride being sort of boastful, gluttony being greedy, wrath is being angry, sloth being lazy, which we're all being encouraged to do during this lockdown period again. So what causes crime? Education, or lack of it. A large percentage of people in prisons actually lack the ability to kind of read and write. TV, media, computer games, alcohol, drugs. Is it a surprise that most crimes happen in this country on a Friday night when people could go out and get drunk, basically? Okay, crime. Next section is the aims of punishment. And so these are why you put people in prison or punish them in the first place. There's kind of some main ones and some examples that you need, and we're going to do some comparisons to the death penalty as well. So the first aim of punishment is protection. So you put people in prison to protect people and stop them doing it again, stop people robbing, stop people hurting people. The death penalty is also a good example of protection, because if you have a murderer and you execute them, they can no longer do any murdering. Retribution means getting even. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's a good quote for that one. It means getting even or getting revenge. Deterrence means the death penalty. If you punish people very severely, they're less likely to commit another crime in the future. They will hear and be afraid. That's a very good quotation to use along with that. Reformation is our fourth one. It's about reforming, changing the prisoner, making them less likely to do it again. In some countries around the world, like the Netherlands, they don't criminalise children or young people, they just give them extra support and education, and usually there's a reason why people do get into crime. Vindication is about the law should be respected, and if you break the law, which has been thought about, considered, voted on in Parliament, there should be a kind of consequence for it. So you need to know the aims of punishment. And reparation is about community service. So if you do anything wrong, you deserve to put it right. If you spray paint a wall, you should clean it up. The next idea, so again, if I'm going too fast, which I probably am on this clip, maybe just pause it, let yourself make those notes, and then move on to the next section with me. Justice. What does justice mean? So fairness, it means. So different crimes deserve different sort of punishments, and if you've done a bad deed, there needs to be some sort of consequence for it. Utilitarianism, I put this down here, this is a concept in humanism, and it's about if you lock up a criminal, or you lock up a few people which are causing lots of crimes, the will benefit from it. If there's 5 criminals in the neighbourhood, lock those up. It's not very good for them, but the rest of the people aren't suffering the consequences for them. There's a way of making things fair. The religions you need to know about are Christianity here, with a big focus on restorative justice and forgiveness, and so they want to make people less likely to do it again, but they also have the idea of forgiveness. For example, Jesus forgave the people who crucified him on the cross. The parable of the adulterous woman, where Jesus forgives the woman who committed adultery, who committed a sin, and they will put emphasis on community service and restorative justice as well. Islam, on the other hand, justice thinks is important because it protects the Ummah, which is the community of Muslims. They also believe in Sharia law, which means the straight path, and also they think deterrence is very important as well. So you have a very severe crime very severe punishment in order to prevent people doing it again. I had a friend at uni who went to live in Saudi Arabia. He lived near Chop Chop Square, where they used to chop off people's arms if you'd been caught stealing. Ouch. Prisons. You need to know a fair bit about prisons. The two people I've got here, John Howard and Elizabeth Fry. Elizabeth Fry is on the £5 banknote which people have in their pockets, or used to be. And prisons used to be pretty unpleasant places. So you can see in the image there, people were just forced to sit there, or sew like mail bags, or do some menial sort of task. They even had things where they had to like walk on a wheel like a hamster. These cruel punishments. Whereas John Howard and Elizabeth Fry made prisons a bit more humane. So they made men and women in separate areas, bigger cells, more light, education, brought in the Bible for people to read. And so it wasn't about cruel punishments, it was about changing people's behaviour. Oh, excuse me. Okay, and so this changed when they were run for profit initially, but then this changed with John Howard and Elizabeth Fry. So the introduction of prison chaplains, these are ministers or people of the church. Christianity and Islam have those, as well as humanists in Winchester Prison particularly. They might have a priest and imam go into the church and give pastoral care to the prisoners. So write down pastoral care, which will give advice, contact home, help them education, help them with links to the outside. They might post letters for the people and help bridge the gap. So when you come out of prison, you've got some relationships, you've got some more training maybe, and you're able to enter society in a in a positive way. So you can see here Elizabeth Frown with the £5 banknote there, the old one. Okay, maybe just pause that if I'm going too fast, which I probably am. Okay, the death penalty. Should we execute people? Yay, lots of people say. No, say a lot of people as well. I know some of my Year 11s will be firmly against the death penalty. If you sit down on the left-hand side of my classroom, I know you will. People on the right-hand side specifically, I think a few people might be pro-death penalty as well. But it's good to have some facts about the death penalty. For example, there's about 80 countries which have it. In America, there's about 31 states, and they use lethal injection, and we used to use hanging in the UK. So arguments you can use to support this side of the discussion, like conservative Christians in America. So Donald Trump, for example, he was an evangelical Christian. Also, the Catholics are generally in favour of it. And you could back it up by a quote like this: "Whoever sheds blood of a man, by man his blood shall be shed. An eye for an eye, thou shalt not kill." Thou shalt not kill is an interesting one, because you could use it against, but you could also use it for, because if you kill, you deserve to suffer as well. And so it's, if you take a life, you deserve to die as well. But the Catholic Church are divided on this. Okay. The Vatican says it's justified in extreme cases. So in Islam, there is if there's a just cause, they will accept the death penalty for crimes of murder, apostasy, which means leaving the religion, adultery, and homosexuality as well. So, and you'll find that in not this country, but other parts of the world, which are Islamic countries: Saudi Arabia, Yemen, parts of Afghanistan, Pakistan as well. And so the arguments against it are mainly about forgiveness. So liberal Christians, Quakers, the Church of England are against it. And you can say, like, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That's what Jesus said before he was crucified. And he had capital punishment, and he forgave his attackers or murderers. You could also use a quote: "Turn the other cheek." The principle of sanctity of life, that only God should be able to take life because it's special and sacred. The golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And then the Quakers are a famous group of churches which campaigned against the death penalty. And they've been campaigning against it for almost 200 years so far. Okay, other charities like Amnesty International campaign against death penalty, and you can also say points like, doesn't it seem like revenge? It's very expensive to execute people. It seems to be quite cruel and barbaric. Public opinion is against the death penalty on the whole. And so all of those arguments you could put into a question around the death penalty. And the humanists point out there's often possible errors when they execute somebody. Forgiveness. Okay, let's talk about some examples here. We've got Martin Luther King, we've got Jesus and the adulterous woman, and we've got Gandhi, and we've got Jesus as well. So let's look at these ideas. So pause this video as I go through, and make sure you've got a note of these. So the idea of reconciliation, which is mending or bringing harmony to an area of discord that's been an argument or a problem. Do not judge others as you will be judged. That's a really good quote, because if you condemn somebody else, you should possibly be condemned in return. Jesus talked about forgiveness of sins on the cross, and the adulterous woman parable. Jesus is being tested by the Pharisees before they try to execute him and kill him. He's teaching in the temple in Jerusalem. He's brought a woman who has committed adultery. So she's actually committed, she's broken her wedding vows and had sex outside of wedlock. And then the Bible says you should stone her to death. What Jesus says is, "I do not condemn you, but go and sin no more." So he says, don't do it again, basically. So that's an example of forgiveness. In Islam, there's a few ideas you can use. So they believe forgiveness is a path to peace because it prevents revenge. Allah is most forgiving. God's forgiveness is unlimited. And Muhammad was very forgiving. Where there was a lady in the story, when they're being persecuted, the early Muslims, he was being criticised by this old lady. I mean, he forgave her when they came to power. Okay. Oh, I've lost the top of that slide. But this is about good and evil. So what is evil? This is quite a difficult question. the ideas about good and evil are quite interesting, because we've got this idea of God creating the universe, God creating everything, and yet we have evil and suffering exist as part of the world. Bad stuff happens. Maybe it's an opportunity for people to show kindness. Maybe it's an opportunity for you to develop as a person. Somebody's car breaks down, you can help them out. Somebody suffers, you can go and visit them in hospital. Maybe the coronavirus is an opportunity for humanity to show how good it is at scientific research. Maybe. People like Martin Luther King and Gandhi are examples of people who showed courage in challenging injustice and unfairness, and they did it. They did it in face of racism, prejudice, the British Empire, and so it's a good example to show somebody who challenging evil, challenging suffering, and also family as a possible support. And so in Christianity, you've got the idea of original sin originating with Genesis. We've got Jesus' teachings. We've got the Ten Commandments, and we've got the idea of compassion and love. These all try and explain away the existence of evil and suffering, because we have moral teachings in Genesis, and we also have moral teachings in the Bible, which promote the ideas of compassion and love to other people. Okay. Let's talk about evil. So you've got these two different types of evil. You've got natural evil, moral evil. Natural evil is caused by forces which are not human, so hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, stuff in kind of nature. And then you've got moral evil, which is caused by a choice. So a human being might choose to steal or rape or piracy or something unpleasant. They've chosen to do, and they could have done something good instead. An interesting philosopher for people who want the top grades when you do your mocks, in possibly March, possibly April, who knows, is a philosopher called St. Irenaeus, and he gave us something called a theodicy, which is an explanation for evil and suffering. And so evil is there as a way of helping you develop as a human being, and so it's there as a challenge. Islam has a slightly different idea on evil and suffering. It has something called the idea of fitra, which is this idea of innate justice, this idea of innate fairness. And so people know what is right, know what is wrong. You have the force of the devil, the shaitan, the devil exists. In the Quran there's stories about jinns and evil spirits and things, and that's down to the free will of the devils. And possibly it's about temptation as well, so people drinking alcohol, taking drugs, and this can lead to suffering. And then you've got sadaq and zakat, which is charity, which are different forms of kind of charity, voluntary giving and obligatory kind of giving. And so charity, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, is there in order to alleviate suffering as well. So lots of ideas around good, evil, and suffering. This is the story of Job. There is a little clip here. So it's not working on PowerPoint, but I can link it in maybe. And so the whole story of Job is a man who has a very bad time. He's a very pious man, a successful man. He has lots of animals. He has a wife. And then God and Satan get together and they have a bargain. And God allows Satan to test him. And so he casts Job with many afflictions. So he has poverty, he has disease, he loses his animals, he loses his family, and he's left sort of on a pile of rubble, sort of weeping and going, "Oh, what's happened to me?" And he asks the kind of question: do I deserve this? And he questions kind of God. And at the end of the story, because he doesn't lose his faith, he's rewarded. And God says to him, "You weren't there when I created the heavens and the earth. You don't understand the divine plan." And so suffering could be there as kind of some things we don't understand. They talk about it as the God's eye view. And so God understands the big plan, but from our little perspective, we can't really get the idea. The idea of al-qadr in Islam, this is the idea of destiny as well. So maybe things happen for a particular reason. Okay, let's see if this clip is working. Okay, so this talks about chaplaincy, prison chaplains.
We've been in prisons really since prisons have begun, as far as this country is concerned. But in formal terms, there's a Prisons Act from the 1950s which specifies that in order for a prison to exist, there needs to be a governor, a medical officer, and a Church of England chaplain. And that act actually is still in force. So the role of the chaplain within a prison is actually enshrined in legislation and is central to the prison's existence. But I do see myself as having a role as a kind of advocate for prison chaplains and an advocate for the place of spiritual things within the life of prisons and in the criminal justice service more widely, so probation and things like that come within the brief as well. But part of it is about trying to articulate the Church's voice on criminal justice matters. So we're recording this on a morning. This afternoon I will be in the House of Lords speaking in the debate on a criminal justice bill. And it's really important to do both so that one connects what's actually going on the ground with the policy level within Parliament and so forth. Most of our chaplaincies now are part of teams where there are people of all different Christian denominations and non-Christian faiths as well. And that's absolutely right and proper. But the place of the Church of England in there is really important, partly because we're the church that in many ways has this capacity to provide a space where others gather. We can guard the space for the spirit and for religious practice. Church of England chaplains aren't always the coordinating chaplain, but they often are. And of course, as the Church of England, we're the church that has that particular relationship with the life of our nation, with issues to do with public life and our public institutions. And therefore, for us to be engaged in prisons work is really important, in the same way as it's important for us to be involved in the health service, in education and so forth, because these are part of the public life and well-being of our nation.
I'm Geoffrey Byrne, I'm the managing chaplain at Rochester Prison and the next door prison, Cookham. Actually, it's quite hard for people to come to church or to come to classes. There are lots of other things that keep people's attention, and I think you have to be a person of courage to begin to engage with faith in an environment like prison, which can be sometimes quite hostile. We do have people who hopefully are beginning to ask questions. They're in prison. It's a time hopefully to reflect on why they're here, what's going on. Maybe there are different life choices you can make. And so chaplaincy is a part of that process of transformation for people. So I don't think it's easy, but it is a time where some people take the time to reflect, or maybe something happens to them while they're in prison, which calls them to stop and think. In prisons, we're ahead of the game in some ways of what's happening in the rest of society, because here, right at the sharp end, where people are living on top of each other, we have people of lots of different faiths, and as a chaplaincy team we need to work together to service those people. And so as chaplains we're learning about each other's faiths, we're learning to work together, and that can be quite challenging sometimes, but it's also very fruitful, it's a very rewarding thing to do, and to be modelling for the men here about how we live and work together, and hopefully they can carry that out to the outside as well.
I have to say, for me personally, it's a spiritually enriching experience, because I do discover God in prison. Now, to some extent to a large extent that's in the lives of people. It's not so much in the services that we lead or anything like that, it's what you see in people. In prison officers and other staff who are motivated by their faith to be doing what they're doing, in the chaplains who by their vocation are saying something about God. They wouldn't be here. It's not an easy calling to be a prison chaplain. They wouldn't be here if God wasn't calling them to be here. It's very clearly recognised, I think, that if we did not have chaplaincy, prisons would be far more difficult to manage. You would struggle to prove that statistically, I suspect, unless you actually removed chaplaincy and tried to see what happens. But I think people kind of just know that if it wasn't here, what goes on in prisons would be impoverished.
Okay, just gives you a bit of an idea about the role of kind of prison chaplains. So the key words are quite important as well, because it's going to be your Part A questions, and also going to link you into your B, C and D questions as well. So I'm going to put the definitions up here. So good, that which is considered morally right, beneficial. Evil, that which is considered extremely immoral, wicked and wrong. Forgiveness, to grant pardon for a wrongdoer and to give up resentment and the desire to seek revenge against a wrongdoer. Free will, the ability to make choices voluntarily and independently. Justice is fairness, so equal provisions and opportunity. Morality, principles and standards determining which actions are right and wrong. Punishment, a penalty given to someone for a crime or wrong they've done. Deliberate immoral action, breaking a religious or moral law. And suffering, pain or distress caused by injury or loss. Okay. Right, I'm going to give you a couple of quotes I think were the best ones to remember for this section. So for Christianity, do not commit murder, really useful. And then this one as well, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But if I tell you, if someone slaps your right cheek, let them slap your left cheek also. This is about forgiveness, so you've got those. And the parable of the unforgiving servant is also very useful. And in Islam, no one can die except by God's permission, the terms being fixed as by writing, and do not take the life which God made sacred except in justice. Okay, some very good quotes to remember. And if you forgive, then Allah is most forgiving. Okay, so these are some past questions. So the last part of the lesson is going to be you having a go at planning or annotating these questions. And you're going to have to take a picture of your answers of this and send them to me via email or show my homework. So what is meant by morality? Describe the work of a prison chaplain. Explain from two traditions attitudes towards forgiveness. And it is impossible to forgive. Discuss your statement showing ideas you consider more than one point of view. Forgiveness for and against. So punishment versus forgiveness. And there's lots of ideas I've been through there. But also use your notes, use your exercise books, use all the other resources available to you as well, and email those to me.